I'd like to read the scriptures with you as they will appear on the screen behind me, and I'm just going to go right through them as they are. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on the earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you will have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." And he took bread and gave thanks and broke it and said to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table. And the Son of Man will go as it has been decreed, but woe to the man who betrays him." They began to question among themselves which of them it might be who would do this. And a dispute arose among them as to which of them was going to be considered the greatest. And Jesus said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you all as wheat, but I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith might not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers." But he replied, "Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death." Jesus answered, "I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me." Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and there he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." When he came back, he found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed a third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come. The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let's go. Here comes my betrayer." Then seizing him, they led him away and took him to the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance, and when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down with them. The servant girl saw him seated in the courtyard, there in the light of the fire, and she looked closely at him. "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You are also one of them." "Man, I am not," replied Peter. About another hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Peter remembered the word that the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Me and John, we got to prepare the Passover meal for last night. I thought, must be really somebody special in order to do this. I wondered if it was because I got it right when Jesus asked who he was. I told him, "You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God." I knew I was right. I'd watched him do miracles, seen him change water into wine at a wedding, healing people with all kinds of different illnesses and ailments. Why, last week, I saw him raise Lazarus from the dead after he'd been in the grave for 4 days. Nobody can do that except the Messiah. I listened to him teach people and teach us too. His compassion, his wisdom, his love for truth, for righteousness. There was no question in my heart or mind when he asked, so I just spat it out. It was obvious from the first time I met him as to who he was. And I knew he really liked me, because me and James and John, he always took us aside from the others and treated us like what seemed kind of special. It was as if we were more important to him than the others. Why, he even called me Rock. He said, "I was Peter, and on this rock," and that's what Peter means, is rock. He was going to build his church, and the gates of hell wouldn't stand in its way. Anyways, the 3 of us, we were the ones who got to go up the mountain and saw him being changed. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes were as white as the light. Not only that, Moses and Elijah came down from heaven because they were there talking with Jesus. I know, I saw it happen. But believe it or not, I was kind of speechless. I know that doesn't happen to me very often. I had a great idea, though, and I told him so. We could build 3 shelters, one for Elijah, for Moses, and then one for him too. Although Jesus didn't answer me, I'm pretty sure he thought it was a nice idea anyway. It was then I knew again for sure who he was, because there was that voice that came from the cloud. I know I heard that voice. It said, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." I knew that was the Almighty speaking. Oh, I was scared, so scared. Well, maybe not as scared as John or James, but I was scared too. And I knew for sure that Jesus was the Son of God. Over the next while, he told us a couple of times that he had to go to Jerusalem and that they were going to do some awful things to him there, even kill him. Well, I didn't want to hear that kind of talk, So I told him off. God forbid, that should never happen to you. I would do whatever it took to make sure that that didn't happen. After all, he was the Son of God, and I had to protect him. Oh, did I get chewed out by him. You would have thought that I was standing against all the plans of heaven the way that he turned on me. Get behind me, Satan, is what he said to me. He sort of explained it, but I guess I just didn't get it. If he goes to Jerusalem, he's going to be killed. And what good is a dead Messiah? We need somebody who can lead us, someone who is alive and well. And I was really hurt. I didn't understand what he was talking about being raised back to life again. That didn't make any sense at all. He told us a couple of more times. But after the chewing out that I got, I thought, I'm not going to stick my neck out again. But if anything like that happens, I will deal with it as it comes up at the time. Anyway, John and me, we had to get the Passover ready. It was a special honor to do that, to put out set the table and get all the dishes out, the charosat and the maror and vetsa. And it was all well done and it looked so good. And then we left to get ourselves ready. It was just right. When we got back, I was looking forward to a special time. Let me tell you, it was the most difficult, unusual Passover meal that I'd ever been at. As the meal got going, Jesus got up from the table. He took off his outer garments, put a towel around his waist, poured some water into a basin, and started to wash our feet. Can you imagine the rabbi doing this? He was doing servant work for us. I wasn't going to let him wash my feet. No way. It would be like sin almost if he were to do that. And I told him so. And then he, oh so lovingly, took me to task and said, unless I wash you, you will have no parts with me. Even though I didn't understand, I felt ashamed of myself. Instead of being the rock, it was like I was a small pebble, so ashamed of myself I was. The rest of the meal, it didn't go very well either. He took the matzah bread and he gave thanks, and then he broke it and said, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Not only that, after supper, he took the fourth cup and said that this is the cup of the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. This was so different. We knew the bread was the bread of affliction. It had always been that back since Egypt. But my body? What's he talking about? The cup of redemption was the redemption of the blood of the Lamb. But he changed it to his blood. It was so confusing. It's like he was taking it over. I didn't understand it all. There were so many other things the Master talked about that didn't make any sense. He even went on to talk about one of us betraying him. Well, if it's possible, the Seder deteriorated even more. It was shameful. My friends started to argue among themselves as to who would be the greatest. Such nerve. And to argue like that in front of the Master. Well, he told them a thing or two. The greatest among them must be the one who serves. Maybe that's what he was trying to teach us when he was washing our feet. About being a servant, I mean. He went on to say to me, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. Well, who did Satan ask? He sure didn't ask me. There's no way I was going to let that happen. It was like I said to Jesus, Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and even to death. And I almost said right after that, well, remember, I'm the one who's the rock. You told me that. After supper, we went to the Garden of Gethsemane. He said to us to wait while he went and prayed. Then he took me and James and John along with him. He really seemed troubled and upset. You know, maybe it was because the things didn't go so well at the Passover Seder. We sat down, we waited for Jesus. But when he came back, it wasn't so good. We were sleeping. He came right up to me and asked if I couldn't stay awake for 1 hour and watch with him and pray with him. And then he left to pray once more. When he came back, we were asleep again. But that's not even the end. It happened one more time. I was asleep. I wanted to crawl away and hide under a rock. Me, the rock. I couldn't even stay awake, let alone anything else. Suddenly, we hear footsteps. It's Judas, and he's got the temple guard with him. And they want to arrest Jesus. Well, I got out my sword, and I started a fight with one of the guys. I cut off his ear. And I was going to keep on fighting, but Jesus said not to. I only did it because I loved him. And I wanted to protect him, but he said no. This was all so that the writings and the prophets could be fulfilled. And we all tore off in a hurry in different directions, just like the Master said would happen. Scared like jackrabbits, we ran in all kinds of directions. I hid until they started to leave. Then I followed them, making sure that they didn't see me. John and me, we went together to the courtyard of the high priest to see what was going to happen to Jesus. Well, when I came into the courtyard, the girl at the door looked at me and asked me, "Are you a disciple of Jesus?" I didn't have any time to think, so I said, No, I'm not. She caught me by surprise, so I just sort of blurted out the no. But then I realized what I had said. I went in and sat by the fire. Covered myself up real good so no one would recognize me. There were a couple of servants from the high priest that were there, as well as some other officials. They didn't bother me much, but there were 5 or 6 of the temple guard who I thought I recognized from the garden with Judas only a couple of hours earlier. Sure didn't want them to spot me, no sir. So I hung my head down and tried not to look their way at all. A little later, another one of the servants came over. Looking closely at me, he pointed at me and he said loudly, "You're one of them too." Well, my heart leapt into my mouth, and the next thing I know is that I'm saying just as loud as he did, "Man, I am not." And I walked away so he couldn't get another look at me. Then I realized what it was I had done, and I said to myself, "Peter, what's wrong with you? Why did you lie?" About an hour later, somebody else came sniffing around. I didn't know it at the time, but he was a relative of the man whose ear I'd cut off in the garden. He'd been there, and he'd seen me, so I know that he knew. And he challenged me, "Didn't I see you at the olive grove?" And just as I was about to speak, from somewhere on the grounds, a rooster crowed. Oh, I was so scared, I lied again. I said no to Jesus 3 times. Coward that I am. Some rock. I'd no sooner denied him the 3rd time when Jesus looked out through the window at the high priest's home, and he looked at me. And it was as if he knew what I had done. Well, of course he did. He's Messiah. Then I remembered the prophecy. And his gaze met mine, and I didn't know where to turn or what to say. How I wanted the rocks to fall on me. I left the courtyard weeping bitter tears. How do you undo betrayal? I don't know. I'll never forget his look as our eyes met. It was so strange. There was no sensing of, I told you so, Peter, why didn't you believe me? The master knew what was going to happen, and he would have been right in condemning me forever. But there wasn't even any anger or hatred on his face. You'd have thought because I denied him, the very Son of God, that he would now deny me. I denied him. Not just once, but 3 times in public, in front of people who needed to know who the Master was, to hear the truth about him. Me, the rock. No anger, no bitterness, no condemnation on his face. It was just if I can say, a quiet and unconditional acceptance of me. If it weren't such an absurd thought after what I did to him at this point, it was like he was reaching out to me to tell me that he forgave me and that he still loved me. Well, that couldn't be. Not after my bragging at the Seder, my falling asleep in the garden, deserting him with the others, denying him in the courtyard, not once, but 3 times. And now hiding. If only he knew how much I loved him in spite of what I did. I know I'd never do it again, to deny him, I mean. Maybe I should just leave it alone. But now I'll never know if what I thought I saw was what really was like. That he was saying to me, I forgive you. I love you. I've fallen so far. If only I could hear a word or two from his lips, words of forgiveness, words of restoration. All my tears will never wash away my guilt or my shame. They'll never remove the horror of what it is that I've done. Yesterday, they crucified him, and he died. John told me, if only I had kept fighting in the garden. If only I hadn't denied him. Some rock I am.